regime planned to introduce constitutional amendment to set up the tricameral parliament, a hated structure with its separate houses for whites, coloreds, and Indians. The African majority was left out in the cold. It was an attempt to lend legitimacy to an illegitimate system. The very purpose was to divide the ranks of the oppressed. In a massive show of defiance, the United Democratic Front was introduced to South Africa and the world at a public rally in Mitchell's Plain attended by more than 10,000 people. The new organization had the potent slogan, UDF unites, apartheid divides. That was the slogan that gained momentum and currency throughout the country. The UDF would go on to mobilize communities across our country against so-called grand apartheid, a system of brute force and petty laws. The UDF organized protests, rent boycotts, consumer boycotts, bus boycotts, and strikes and stayaways. In some ways, it acted like a super trade union in terms of even cajoling unions to participate in the strikes that were initiated by the United Democratic Front. Affiliates assisted the families of detainees, campaigned for their release, organized political funerals, and conducted political education. What made the UDF unique was its distinct political culture. It was able to forge alliances with organizations that identified with its aims. It had no rigid structures that manifest themselves in hierarchies and red tape. This enabled it to grow rapidly and expand its influence. At its height, there were more than 3 million community members and more than 400 organizations to 600 organizations under the banner of the United Democratic Front. It is clear that the UDF transformed in many ways the political landscape in our country. What is remarkable is that this mass movement that also got to be referred to as the Mass Democratic Movement, MDM, it achieved so much when it was just in existence for just 8 short years. We remember the many UDF leaders who are no longer with us, who kept our people's hopes alive, leaders, and I'll just mention a few like Griffiths Mklenge, Victoria Mklenge, Sister Bernard Ngube, Reverend Beas Nodie, Archie Gumede, Billy Naya, Mama Albertina Sisulu, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and the many leading lights of the movement. We also remember the many UDF activists who were detained without trial, who were tortured, and who were killed by the regime, and the many, many men and women from across South Africa who made up the rank and file of the UDF. We are in many ways blessed that we still have a number of those brave leaders of the UDF amongst us. We have, yes, people like Comrade Popo Molefe, Reverend Frank Chikane, Aaron Rensberg, Vali Musa, Murphy Murobe, Trevor Manuel, Cheryl Carolus, Lulu Johnson, and we also have a very key one of the key UDF supporters who really held up the UDF flag, Audrey Coleman, and many others who are amongst us today. And we honor you. We honor you all for your bravery. You demonstrated bravery. And those I may have left out is because I didn't see you as I entered. We honor you for your bravery, for your foresightfulness, for your integrity, for your loyalty to the people of our country. History will record your great contribution. Many in our country today have been vocal about their unease at the gulf between the values that guided the liberation struggle and the country that we live in today. Many in our country, including some who are gathered here today, are disappointed that the non-racialism and the unity embodied by the United Democratic Front has been lost. To many, it has been supplanted by ethnic chauvinism and factionalism, even within the liberation movement. That is why, as the UDF at 40 call to action puts it, we have to recover the best traditions, the ethos, and the values of our democratic struggle. The UDF was defined as much as what it was fighting for as by what it was fighting against. The UDF used people's power to break the power of an illegitimate regime. Its general mission was clear. It was a grassroots movement of building up, of empowering people, of promoting personal agency, and of encouraging citizens to play an active role in their communities. For this and many reasons, characterizing the UDF solely as a mass protest movement would be a half story. And the lessons we can learn from the UDF experience cannot be confined to people taking to the streets. Of the many proud legacies of the UDF, a strong civil society is one of the most important ones. The culture of community engagement and activism was perfected during the UDF era. It is undeniable that civil society has flourished since 1994. This is a barometer of good health for a democracy. We have a free press, as Anton Harber was confirming today as former editor of the Weekly Mail. People enjoy freedom of association and the right to protest. People's power is alive and well. We have seen it being harnessed to drive change. We saw it right at the beginning of our democracy when we drafted our Constitution. The Constitution that Comrade Popo Molefe spoke so well about was drafted by the people of our country. And that was in the true tradition of the groundwork that had been laid by our forebears when they met in 1955 to draft the Freedom Charter. The foreground that had also been laid by many other organizations, including the UDF, that focus more on citizen action or citizenry action, activism rather. In the late 90s, the activism of the Treatment Action Campaign and others for access to HIV treatment is a clear demonstration of what active citizenry means. In 2015, the hashtag Fees Must Fall student movement also laid the basis for dramatic changes to access to higher education. In 2018, the hashtag Total Shutdown Against Gender-Based Violence brought government and civil society together to develop a clear, united plan to tackle the scourge and the pandemic of gender-based violence. Now, a number of new laws have come into effect that give greater protection to survivors of gender-based violence and harsher sentences to perpetrators. The mass mobilization under the UDF umbrella in the 80s was to realize the aspirations of the Freedom Charter. Since the advent of democracy, we have worked actively to fulfill these aspirations and those of the Constitution that was inspired by the Freedom Charter. Equality before the law and human rights for all, expanded access to education and health care, land reform and restitution, an extensive social protection system, and workers' rights, including a national minimum wage which was clearly articulated in the Freedom Charter, are just some of the measurable gains we have registered. Even as we know that we still have much further to go, we should not diminish what has been achieved. As government, we have expressed our determination to leave no one behind, which is in keeping with the spirit of the great United Democratic Front. The reality is that despite our gains, millions of our citizens still feel left behind. Many colored and Indian compatriots who were the backbone of the UDF feel excluded from our nation's political life and point to the underrepresentation in decision-making structures as evidence of this. Many white South Africans wrongly believe there is no place for them in South Africa today, and some have drifted towards Lager-style politics and a siege mentality. Women feel marginalized and unprotected as they are preyed upon in their homes, at schools, at places of higher learning, and even in places of worship. Young people, a third of our population, are feeling the cold winds of exclusion from opportunity. They see politics as the preserve of older people and are not voting or even bothering to register to vote. By far, those who feel most excluded and neglected are the urban and the rural poor, the unemployed and society's most vulnerable. We are alive to the reality that in a number of respects, the democratically elected government has fallen short of meeting the needs of the people of South Africa, much as it has done much to address many of their needs. Corruption, wasteful expenditure, and general malfeasance are the rot that must be excised before they completely reverse our democratic gains. However, this important occasion, comrades, should not come to be remembered for having been a drawn-out history lesson or another opportunity to dissect the shortcomings of the government of the day. I was at a meeting of the Johannesburg region of the ANC yesterday, and many of the comrades who are leaders of our branches were outlining the challenges that the members of our communities face. But one of them stood up and said, "Comrades, rather than use this moment as a lamentation session, let us come up with solutions. Let us come up with solutions that will add to what is being done by the state when it comes to fighting crime." And he said, let us get actively involved in community policing forums. Just like what Comrade Popo was saying, just like what the UDF taught us to do, community involvement. And he said, let us get involved in the school governing bodies. Let us get involved in the health sector so that the clinics that serve our people, those who work in them should know that the community is intricately involved in making sure that our clinics work well, our police stations work well. We as communities must go to the police station, make sure that they are not sleeping in the charge office when they should be investigating crime. I found that to be inspirational. I found that to be a comrade who was saying, of course we have many challenges. And I informed the meeting yesterday that I was coming to this commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the UDF. And I informed them that one of the lessons that we can draw from the UDF is community activism, community engagement, being proactive, finding solutions, crafting solutions so that our people can lead a better life. Let us remember this, because we should not use this opportunity just to dissect what the shortcomings are. We should use this opportunity to recall the activism that we were taught by the UDF, to recall the political culture that was imparted on all of us and future generations by those who gathered in 1955 to draft the Freedom Charter, by those who got involved in the 50s in the various boycotts led by Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and many others. Let us recall the culture that was put before all of us by the UDF. Let us also remember what we are fighting for. The biggest enemy of the people is poverty and unemployment. This is the tide that must turn. This is what the war that we have to wage is all about. It is against exclusion, marginalization, and inequality in all its forms. And so when we make a call for a stronger civil society, as we are doing today, for transformation, for accountability, we must be as committed as the UDF was to leaving no one behind. As we look at what is happening in our local government sphere, where the services that should be provided to our people are not being provided as well as they should, where money that is budgeted as grants for our local government goes unspent because our leaders at that level cannot find ways of stealing the money and it would rather be returned rather than serve the people. We must get involved through citizen action to make sure that we rid our country of all this. The resurgence of people's power as a force for positive change, with its calls for an active citizenry, has come at the right time. We remember Amilcar Cabral's words that the people are not fighting for ideas. They are not fighting for what is in the heads of leaders. They want to win the material benefits. And it is these material benefits that we must ensure that our people get. What matters most to the people of South Africa is that they want a better life for themselves and their children. They want to lead lives of dignity, of security, and to have decent work. That is prominent in the minds of South Africans. Affording one's rent, putting food on the table, having running water and a decent sanitation, sending one's children to school. These are the bread and butter issues that the UDF was seized with, helping people to secure. It was part of political activism. When the UDF was at its most powerful, South Africa was a different place. The enemy was clear. Today, the threats to the well-being of the people of our country come in many guises. These threats are corruption, malfeasance, the abuse of public office for personal gain. These threats are also greedy corporates that exploit workers, that evade paying tax and hoard their profits instead of employing more people or plowing their profits back into improving the lives of our people through employment or real serious community projects. These threats include the gangsters and the criminal syndicates that are making life a living hell for our citizens, including on the Cape Flats, where the UDF was formed 40 years ago. These threats also include patriarchal attitudes, sexism and misogyny that are fueling violence against women and children in our society today. They are immoral. These threats include immoral business practices that hurt the poor the most, practices like price gouging, the exploitation of tenants by landlords, illegal evictions, selling unsafe food, and predatory lending as well. They also include xenophobia, homophobia, tribalism, and all forms of chauvinism that are breeding fear, mistrust, and even stoking violence within and amongst our communities. And so when calls are made to reclaim our democracy, we cannot but be categorical about how we plan to go about doing this. It is encouraging to note that the very practical proposals made by the UDF at 40 on how to catalyze and activize the citizens of our country are very practical proposals. These include encouraging citizens to join community policing forums, as Comrade Popo Molefe was saying, to join school governing bodies, for young people to volunteer in communities, reviving sports and arts and culture clubs for young people in communities, and for stronger ward committees as well. This shows an understanding that the social ills in our country are complex, and that people's power must be directed to bring about change across society and not just in our politics. Our politics have become very complex right now. There are all manner of political affiliations, moon screens, moon shots, and moon whatever, and so forth. Now, history does not demand of us another manifesto. And today, when we celebrate UDF at 40, we must not seek to draft a manifesto. We should not be setting up some steering committee or political superstructure. The UDF's place in history is assured, and it will forever be remembered, as is the leaders who led the UDF as well. What is demanded of us is that we go back to our communities, to listen to them, to encourage them, and to unite them as the UDF did. If we are looking to recapture the momentum that was made by the UDF, that made the UDF such a formidable force, we first need to understand the conditions under which our people are living and what matters most to them. In March 1966, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave a lecture at the campus of the Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, and he's reflecting on the progress of the civil rights movement. He said, "Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the time and persistent work of dedicated individuals." Gathered here today and listening from their homes or wherever people are as this is being live streamed are many such dedicated men and women. And here in this whole City Hall of Johannesburg today are gathered men and women who in the main want to make sure that South Africa is a better place. The task before us, therefore, is that those who are amongst us, and some of whom witnessed the birth of the UDF and who were part of that movement, should not cling to the baton or put it in a museum somewhere so that we can marvel over it and tell stories about this baton. Our task, our duty, is to take this baton and pass it on. On this 40th anniversary of the UDF, I would urge that let us set our sights high on what must be done to overcome the most immediate challenges facing the people of South Africa. Let us not outsource what we can do. Let us do what we can do ourselves and turn the fortunes of our people's lives around. This, I do believe, we can do. This, our democracy, is strong despite a number of attempts to weaken it. Yes, Comrade Popo, you are right. There have been many attempts to weaken our democracy. We went through unrest in 2021, and we've gone through a whole number of other iterations that have sought to turn back the tide of progress that we had registered. But democracy cannot build itself. It is up to us to do so. Let us build it up. Let us take forward this democracy through actively engaging, actively being committed. When we drafted the National Development Plan, of which Trevor Manuel was the chair, one of the central parts of the National Development Plan was active citizenry. where we said the only way we can really succeed as a nation is when the people of South Africa are actively involved. And comrades and friends, we all got actively involved when we buried apartheid. When we drafted our new constitution, we got involved, we put our views forward, we actively campaigned for the Bill of Rights in our constitution today. We put forward our views, we had many suggestions, and I would say let us do the same today. Let us come forward and be active as citizens. Let us define and drive a new generational mission that in the spirit of the mighty UDF unites, inspires, and leaves no one behind. I do believe that we are capable of doing this. Let us go on and do what the UDF did 40 years ago. Thank you very much.
Jeff, thank you very much.
I can't see you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Me and my whistle and this.